I'm gonna talk about forks and restoring your motorcycle. If you plan on restoring your motorcycle, or if you restored a motorcycle and you can't seem to tune your forks right, and you don't want to spend, thousands of dollars for new components, or what the uh, what the perfect combination or the sweet spot is. This this is fork oil right here. It came from four shocks and approximately 2 years of usage. And if you can tell, it is it's black, and it's a mixture. It's a mixture of 2.5 weight fork oil, and I'll tell you the company I used. I used Bel Ray. 2.5 ultralight fork oil, racing oil, and a combination of automatic transmission fluid. Now, the grade of the automatic transmission fluid varies. This is high mileage automatic transmission fluid. My guess, this is just a guess, so don't quote me, and but it's common sense when you do this stuff. The high mileage automatic transmission fluid, I would say, is about 15 to 20 weight. It is very, very thick, and if you only use ATF, you're not going to get the right performance or tune out of your fork. Now, this is very crucial because you're going to have to mix it with something in order to get a right blend. Now, this is a good fork oil. But the problem is that the grade is not consistent. If you use the regular one, okay, which is any generic synthetic automatic transmission fluid, which excludes the high mileage. This is high mileage. If you use only ATF without the high mileage, then my guess would be it's a 15 to 20 weight. It's a little bit lighter than the high mileage. The advantage of the high mileage is it has seal conditioners that really improve the existing seals. So in my case, when I restored my motorcycle, I changed the bushings. Now the bushings are on the very bottom of the fork. If you take a look at the forks here, okay, I don't have an upside down fork. I have Showas. These are basically what the cartridges look like. And I believe I have 43 millimeter. So I have 43 millimeter Showas. And you have the outside. That's the outside. And that's the inside. And then you have your lower triple tree here. And then you have your upper triple tree here, followed by your steering yoke, steering stem, whatever. This is where you stick the pin for the lift. So here's your outer cartridge, inner cartridge, lower triple tree, upper triple tree, steering yoke. Your pin for your triple tree goes in here to lift the front end, and that props the entire bike up so that you can remove both forks. You can put a jack underneath the exhaust right here, and then take the triple tree down, because that jack and the rear kickstand, or anyhow you jack it up using a stand, is more stable if you put the jack right here than the triple tree. I did have a bike fall off the triple tree. It is not stable. So be aware that the triple tree, especially without that 22, 23 millimeter pin right there, is very unstable, and the bike can fall if, like a cat, jumps on it, or if the wind blows it. Those factors I have to deal with, and those factors I have to be very careful with. Now the bushing is on the inner cartridge. Once you take the top one, which is a 23 millimeter on the Honda BFR, once you unscrew the top cap, the spring assembly will come out, but you have a screw down here that you have to remove before the whole thing comes off. And on the bottom where that screw is, where this screw right here is, and on the bottom of that inner cartridge, and the spring is right there. This thing right here is the bushing. That's the bushing right there. And the screw goes right into there from the bottom. So your axle comes right here, your front wheel is right there. Replace the bushings here. You don't have to replace the spring, and you really don't have to replace any other part. But the spring here and the seals inside, you probably will have to replace if you restore the Showa shock. Now, if the previous owner took care of the bike and changed the fork oil every 2 years or 24 months or whatever mileage the manufacturer, the manual recommends, the seals should be pretty good if there is some type of conditioner. It's hard to say. It's hard to say on what type of abuse it's been through, what type of chemicals it's been exposed to, and what type of conditioners have been used to restore the seals, if that is the case. Now, in this case, I'm pointing out the ATF with the high mileage. It does have conditioners for seals, but it's made for, obviously, transmissions. And transmissions, if you know automatic transmissions, they're very prone to failure, especially the planetary gears and especially the torque converters. So they have very sensitive seals, and they have very sensitive parts in there that have to be really finessed if you want your transmission to go an extra 20,000, but they tend to wear out at about the same amount of wear and tear. In other words, you can predict how long a transmission will last, but it doesn't say that using these products or using a high mileage automatic transmission fluid is going to increase the longevity of that transmission. So therefore, the argument or the theory that if you use high mileage automatic transmission, you're going to get the maximum life or a maximum longevity in the internal parts of a transmission system. That being said, the automatic transmission is a fallacy. It's a moot point. There's no scientific evidence to prove it, and there's no scientific evidence to say that it's not true. The bottom line is that anything that has high mileage is designed to recondition the internal seals to include any oil seals. In this case, the fork seals. You have 2 fork seals inside here that have to be in working order. I had to change mine out. They're not expensive. You can get very generic ones for 43 millimeter forks if you do your research for about less than $5. So for less than $5, you can change out the inner seals. The bushings are very expensive. They're about $30 for 2 of these. And in my case, I had to replace one of these only. One of them was too damaged to be repaired or reused, so that was replaced. Now, after restoring the fork, the spring was an issue. And I say the spring is an issue because on one bike, now the other bike did not get the bushing restoration. It got new seals only. So it got new seals, and it got new covers on it, but it did not get any new bushings, copper bushings, and it had a less amount of wear and tear on the coils on the spring inside. So naturally, the spring was of a higher tension than the other bike. And when you do your fluid, when you put your fluid in here, things don't really scientifically add up like they're calculated, because when you buy a motorcycle, the spring is factory set. That means that it's starting out its life based on the owner's riding, the owner's, riding ability, and also the abuse that the owner is putting it through based on their weight, based on what type of road they go through, based on a lot of factors like potholes, hitting big potholes at high speed or even hitting speed bumps at high speed can really do some wear and tear on that spring here, because they're going up and down, up and down. Now, if motocrossers, they do the jumps and everything. I mean, these forks are everything, and motocrossers are probably the best people to talk to about forks and the springs. I'm not claiming I am or anything like that. I'm saying that after 20 or so years and after restoring your vehicle, one fork may be different from the other fork. This fork may be different from this fork in performance, and these two forks may be different from two other sets of forks. That's what I'm trying to say. So there's no scientific formula, and unless you want to replace everything to get them back to factory specs, you're going to have to play it by ear, kind of, and work out your own solutions. Okay? And that's what I'm going to cover today, because in my case, restoring your bike is one thing, restoring your shocks are another thing. Taking a corner at 100 miles an hour is another game altogether. And doing it on a day-to-day basis with absolute confidence, 100% perfection and confidence is the name of the game when you look at a VFR 750. Okay? These bikes are designed to be race ridden. They have been raced, and they've been successful, very successful on the racetrack. But, I'm not looking for a race bike per se, but I'm looking for something that has that performance. And if you get a bike that's over 20 years or even a cafe racer, you're not going to have that factory spec where it starts out at the beginning of its life period. And the life cycle that it went through may be shortened by both the care or maintenance or the abuse of the previous owner. Those two things also come into play. Now, these springs are over $1,000. The internal and the springs are over $1,000 if you get an aftermarket. The bushings are relatively inexperienced, so my suggestion is to take care of them. Okay, and my suggestion is not to put yourself in a situation where you're going to have to upgrade the internal parts. So take good care of them. Make sure you understand what you're doing, and make sure that you follow the maintenance routine or use your best common sense to take care of your shocks and the cartridges. Now, because of this, what you're going to look at is your fluid. And this is very important because now things are kind of relative. So your fluid is the only thing that you're going to be manipulating, okay? Because all things said, you can't tell if this is equal, you can't tell if this is equal, but you'll come to the assumption that as a pair, they work in unison. Okay, so your fluid level is where you're going to start. Now, if you start off with a 2.5 weight, okay, I can tell you right now exactly how many fluid ounces you will need for one fork. On the Honda VFR or any 43 millimeter Showa that is identical to the VFR, which Honda uses very often on their sport bikes. The 43 millimeter Showas will receive 13 fluid ounces in each fork. Don't quote me on that number, but it's a good average or it's a good number to go by. If you don't know how much fork oil to put in, do not follow what the previous person put in. Follow 13 fluid ounces, okay? Or if you know it's the first time that you've changed it, or know exactly, looked it up, and you know exactly it should be around 13 fluid ounces. Okay, so based on that assumption, you're going to have a number to go with. That is 13. Now, I myself like the 2.5 because the 2.5, I can buy the highest quality fork oil on the market at a 2.5 weight and add the ATM on it to give it a higher grade with the high mileage and the sealed conditioner. That said, that's your starting point. You probably want to go with a 50-50 mix. So you're going to go 6.5 fluid ounces of 2.5 weight fork oil, along with 6.5 fluid ounces of automatic transmission fluid, or 20W 20 weight transmission fluid. Okay, so you're either going to go with a 20 weight, or you're going to go with a 2.5. Another one is to go with say 12.5 weight. Okay, that's a good starting point. It's between 10 and 15 weight fork oil. So my recommendation on the fork oil is 2.5 with automatic transmission fluid. If you don't want to start there, go with a 10 to 15 weight fork oil. Okay, now I have 4 forks, so that's something to consider. How many forks are you trying to go 100 miles around a corner? You know, or how perfect do you want your suspension? I can tell you that the VFR capability, the 43 millimeter Showa, when it's operating right, is it's so dialed in. It's been raced so many times that you will be 100% sure. Okay. Now, even with new bikes, when you buy a new bike, taking a corner at 100 miles an hour sometimes is not feasible. It's not something that's practical. It's not something that bike is designed to do. And for God's sakes, it don't have 43 millimeter Showas that won a lot of races back in the 80s and 90s. So that's something to consider. But if you start off with a 50-50 mix of these two, like I said, you're going to get a feel of what the fork is doing. It's either going to be too heavy or it's going to be too light. Now, on the top of it, there is an adjuster. And that adjuster looks like that. Okay? So when you tighten it all the way clockwise, you are tightening the spring to a tighter dampening. Okay? So if you go clockwise on there and go until it stops, you're tightening the dampening to its highest setting. That could be your starting point. You could also back up on it 2 turns, okay? And that could be your starting point with any of these two, all right? So you're backing off 2 turns on the tight side, and you're going to do what I used, which is the 50-50 2.5 and ATM, which gives you about 12.5 to play with, roughly. Try to buy a liter. Because when you start looking at fork oil, they come in quarts or liters. There are 2.2 quarts in a liter, so you're getting twice the volume when you buy a liter than when you buy a quart. Now, I'm using Honda line right now, specifically made for Showa and designed for Showa. This is the Bel Ray right here, and it is a good fork oil, but the Honda line made by Showa under the Honda name is what I'm using right now. And I can tell you it's very good. I can tell you it's really, really good. It's twice the cost of the previous one I used, which was the Bel Ray at 2.5 weight. Okay, so you may want to go with the lowest grade and try to get the biggest bang for your buck. but is extremely expensive. I can tell you that. One quart is about $16. So you're looking at $16 for a quart versus I think I got it maybe $12 off Amazon when I had Prime. I don't have Prime anymore, and I don't really care for it because I've had so many bad experiences with Amazon that I won't even order it from there anymore. But my experience with Amazon has been a nightmare for the last year, so I don't even order and I don't even bother with Amazon anymore. They send my packages out to California, and I'm sitting here and I'm saying, you know what? I've never ever had anything sent out to California. Okay, so I had to track it down. I had to go get it, return it, all kinds of stuff. It was crazy. It was crazy. So I just said, okay, that's it. Screw me over once, screw me over repeatedly, and that's it. Okay, so I won't even order from Amazon anymore. But keep in mind that the quart of Honda line, or the quart of factory Showa, developed by Showa, and it's Honda Racing, for the Showa forks, is very expensive, but it is really, really good. Okay. Um, Once you do your two setting with the 50-50 mix to see where you're at, you're going to know right away how your springs react and how the internals react. Okay, it's either going to be too heavy, meaning that it's too stiff, or it's going to be too light, meaning that it just boom, sinks down every time. Every time you move it, it just sinks down. When you push the bike around, it's not supposed to sink down. And when you push the bike down, it's supposed to just kind of feel nice and smooth. You'll notice a difference when you go over speed bumps and when you hit potholes or anything on the road. You want to be able to feel it, but you don't want to be so shaken up that your hands fly off your handlebar. Because realistically, if you hit something big, like a car, you'll probably fly off the motorcycle. That's guaranteed. But you'll understand now where that spring is. And it's not necessarily the spring per se, it could be the fluid. So before you fork out $1,000 or $2,000 for new internals, try the liquid. Try to alter the grade of the liquid. And in this case, now I've got 4 forks. In this case, 2 of them were too soft and the other 2 were too hard. Can you believe it? At 2 turns, one was too stiff, and on 2 turns, one was too soft. And the one I'm talking about right now was too soft. So in order to alleviate that, when I changed this, what I did was I did a 85-15 mix. Okay. Now 85, because I had a 50-50, I'm doing an 85-15 this time. So 85% ATM, 85% ATM, 15% 2.5 weight. Okay. Now that 85 to a 2.5 meant that I have 85% remaining for the one that's too stiff. So the one that's too soft got 15%, and the one that was too stiff got 85%. 85 with a 15% ATM. Actually, I used about a 50-50, honestly, on the too stiff one, and it turned out almost perfect. Yeah, believe it or not, it turned out almost perfect when I used all of the Honda line with the ATM, and I think I'll tell you, the grade was a little bit thicker too, but let's not get too technical into that. So basically, once you start out with a 2 setting and it's too soft, you want to probably go to your maximum, which is going to be about 6. Without, you don't want to go too far loosening it, because it's not going to do anything. It's just going to make it softer. Like, you can't even tell if it's too stiff. You're not going to tell if your fluid grade is too stiff and you start adjusting it to a 6 turns outwards. It's not really going to do anything. It's still going to be too soft or too hard. In this case, I had 2 turns, so what I want to do is 0 turns. Okay, so now it's set to 0 turns, but it was too stiff. Too soft. So now I left it at 0 turns, or the original one, and dropped the fluid from 50-50 to an 85-15. Does that make any sense? And to be honest with you, it feels perfect. And on the other one, uh, from a 50-50 mix, ATM to 2.5 grade, it was too hard. So what I did was I took it and I went 6x. So I turned it 6x out. Now when I put it in here and changed the fluid, I went with a 50-50 mix, but different fluids. And I also used this is not high mileage. I use the regular ATF, which is synthetic oil, but it's just regular. It has no high mileage in it. I went with a 50-50 mix because the original, this is not high mileage, original or standard automatic transmission fluid is lighter than the high mileage, just a little in my opinion. But it is enough to make a difference, and it turned out perfect. You may have to take a guess at it if it's not where you like it and you've got the maximum setting as I do. On the maximum setting when it's too loose and the maximum setting when it's too stiff. When you make these changes, you should feel a change immediately. And you can dial it in to the point where it's so perfect that you hit a bump and you can feel it, but it doesn't really. It just makes you feel confident in a turn. It makes you feel, and you're going to push yourself to a point where your tires cannot handle it. So don't see it as over complacency or a lack of security. Sometimes people have what they call a false sense of security. Again, just because your suspension works perfectly doesn't mean that your tire is going to stick on the ground. That's called a false sense of security. Sure, you can lean it over, and sure, you can go faster and faster, but that doesn't guarantee that your tire is going to hold to the ground. There's a lot to that too, including buying new tires. But in addition to that, what's on the road, what's on your tires, your maintenance, or what have you done, if anything, to make that tire a little bit better, such as warming it up, such as keeping warmers on it. And I don't do that. That's only for the racetrack. But don't get that false sense of security that because your suspension now is perfect, that you're going to take corners at 100 miles an hour. So, but what I'm trying to describe is that when you buy a bike or have a bike that's over 25 years old, throw away the scientific formula, because whatever you do is going to be based on how the previous owner took care of it and how they abused or pampered it. Okay, so the fluid is basically the biggest factor that you're going to have to work with. And unless you want to buy a couple $1,000s worth of internals, it's just not worth it. So lighten your grade or thicken your grade of fork oil and put it on its maximum or minimum setting with wherever you start, and go backwards from there until you're at the point where you are perfectly satisfied with what it's doing. Now, it's not supposed to be too soft, and it's not going to be too hard. If it's too soft on the front, it's going to throw off your rear dampening. Okay? So if it's too soft on the front, that means that the front's diving down real easily. As you're in its turn and it's starting to bobble, 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 you're going to feel something freaky on the front end. You're going to be sitting there and it's like, this feels a little freaky, and you don't want it too soft on there. But at the same time, you want to be able to feel the road and feel the little bumps and stuff, so you know what you're dealing with. But that's what I mean when I say that restoring a bike is one thing, riding fast is another. And when it comes to suspension is integral to how your tire sticks, what your confidence is, how you brake, how well that bike brakes, how well that bike tractions, and how well that bike goes in a straight line. So all those factors come in. Okay, so it's something that you have to work at before you can understand, but it's also something that you will eventually get right if you are careful and detailed about what's going on with the forks, what you like and don't like about it. All right. On the next video, I'm gonna try to explain how to make the starter wire and the neutral wire, because that's something that is gonna really confuse you, especially if you're trying to restore a bike and it comes with the original starter wire and you're asking yourself, now the ignition coils, I figured out how to restore it. You know, you cut the caps out, test the internals, and then just shrink wrap them, shrink wrap them or glue them back, either or. I glued them and shrunk wrap them because rubber cement sticks like crazy. Put rubber cement on there and, shrink wrap it. It's almost like a brand new outer skin. So I was able to test my ignition coils and also test my wires to a point where it was just instant and it was at its lowest ohm setting. So the factory gives you two settings, where your lowest ohm and your highest ohm, and you have to stay within those that that tolerance level. I was able to get all my ignition coils down to the lowest ohm setting, and now the ignition coils are no issue. Now those things are so expensive if you go buy them brand new, and they're very difficult to find if you have a VFR. So that's if you want to rebuild your ignition coils, watch my video and just understand what I did. I cut the tube out, pulled it out, pulled the internals out, checked each one, took a rotary, cleaned them all, cleaned everything off, took a brush, snaked them and cleaned them, and then made sure that there was no corrosion, no rust, and when you also measure it, you can measure the wire, you can measure anything for ohms and resistance, and you'll know if there's corrosion inside, outside, or if the component is fried and doesn't work anymore after 25 years. So if you have too high of a resistance on there, it's going to retard your ignition, which means that you're not getting the right spark. And you may get blowback, you may get, unspent fuel out the back. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. But once your ignition is restored or rebuilt to what it should be, um, it's phenomenal. Is phenomenal from what it used to be. It's like it just came out of the showroom, and it's something that you'll really notice a difference on. Same with your forks. It's something that you're really going to notice if you take the time to be careful and start somewhere before you start to get lost or where you don't want to be. Start somewhere and then begin to go where you want it to be at. All right, so I hope that helps, and it helps define why forks and suspension can be a very upsetting part of sport bikes and going fast or trying to go fast or just trying to be safe. Motorcycles are dangerous enough. Try to make things that are very difficult, a little bit more realistic, and try to get the most bang out of your buck in doing so. So, if you want to take the other route, spend a couple $1,000s, be my guest. But I've got better things to spend my money on, and I've got other things that I'd rather spend on the bike than to start, dicking around with too much of this craziness that's part of rebuilding and restoring, vehicles. All right, so hope that helps, and I'll do the next video on the starter wire and the neutral wire, which in my case broke. It broke due to corrosion, and when it broke, I bought new ones, but even new ones, I bought used ones from junkyards, but even the new ones from junkyards aren't as good. Aren't as good until you make it yourself, and when you make it yourself, it's brand new. You're starting from square one, brand new. nothing is going to go wrong with it. All right.